I'm Lisa. I am with the SHARE project here in Haywood County, and I've been doing a series of interviews where we have been talking about resources in Haywood County and those types of things. The SHARE project, SHARE stands for Spreading Hope and Awareness and Removing the Epidemic Stigma. And each of the interviews has been touching on one of those words: spreading hope, spreading awareness, removing the stigma. Today I think we're probably talking a little bit more about awareness. Not only awareness of a resource, but awareness of a topic that is a little bit different than some of the interviews. We're going to go a little bit younger as far as our target audience, if you will, or our target group of people that we're trying to educate. So anyway, I am with Libby Ray. She is with Mountain Projects.
Yep.
I love your website, Mountain Strong.
Yeah, thank you. It's Mountain Strong WNC.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
which I will put a link to. But with Mountain Projects, now Mountain Projects, I will let Libby tell us a little bit more because they do a lot in the community, and they have a lot of topics and things that areas that they work in. Libby is specifically a preventionist, and I am going to let her tell you what that means exactly, and then of course a little bit about her. Tell me a little bit about yourself first, and then we'll break apart what preventionist means.
Sounds good. So I am originally hail from the Midwest, but I went to high school many years ago in Transylvania County, and I consider this area home. This is the area my parents still live in, and so I'm thankful to be back in this area. And I actually I went into the human services field. That's what I decided to do when I was in school. Got my bachelor's and master's degrees in social work. And I've done a lot of different things. I've worked in a lot of different settings, and as time went by, I realized that I kind of had a heart for prevention, because I've seen both sides. I've seen what happens when families are in crisis and things are going pretty rough, and and sometimes things can't be helped at all. But I also came to value the fact that if we can do what we can do, to try to prevent things from going wrong, or from people losing their lives or whatever, that's always better.
Yes.
So that's how I got into prevention. But now, as there's all kinds of prevention, right? I worked for a public health department for a time where I was doing different types of prevention. But now, specifically at Mountain Projects, I work in our substance abuse prevention or substance misuse prevention department. And we really, it goes beyond that in the sense that what we're trying to do is to build a healthier community, healthier environment for our kids to grow up in. So in relation to substance abuse or substance misuse, there are so many things that can play into whether that happens, right? And I think I try to compare it to all other kinds of situations. So for example, we're sitting in a park today.
Yes. There's a reason for that. Not only is it a beautiful afternoon after a day of rain yesterday, but also we are practicing our social distancing today because we are recording this during COVID time. So there is a reason for that.
Yes. But this is a great example of it makes it easier for people to make healthy choices when there are recreational facilities available to them. And a community that has parks throughout the community so that they're accessible to people who maybe don't have transportation. That's one way that we can promote greater physical activity.
Yes.
Which we know then in turn leads to better heart health and reduced risk of obesity and all kinds of other things.
Yes, which is a preventative measure.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So, what people don't always think about is that there are things that we can do to reduce the risk for substance misuse or substance abuse. For example, you mentioned that we're talking about a younger group of people today. So we know that the younger someone is when they have their first use of whatever substance, whether it's alcohol or tobacco or marijuana, the greater their risk for developing a substance use disorder later in life as an adult. So that doesn't mean that, say, a kid has their first experience with alcohol at age 14. That doesn't mean that they're going to develop a substance use disorder as an adult, but it does place them at a higher risk.
Yes, increases the odds a little bit.
Yeah. So, and the truth is that among kids who use alcohol or tobacco, for example, before the age of 21, the average age of first use here in our community is around 13.
Okay, 13.
And that's pretty typical. That's pretty typical of other communities. It's typical across the state. I think the state average is 14. But so for those kids for whom, they start that early, that increases their risk. So if we can delay the age at which kids, try those things, that helps reduce their risk. If we can teach parents how to have conversations with their kids,
Okay, yes.
that's another way that we can try to reduce the risk. If we look at, what's the saturation of, well, I used to work strictly in tobacco, and we would look at how many tobacco retailers are there, in close proximity to a low-income neighborhood, or how many places are there in close proximity to a school. All of those things, they all play into it.
Yeah. So what would you say is the largest precursor to someone trying at that early age, or trying just in general, in their early teen years? Is it family issues going on? Is it peer pressure? What would you say is, have you found, I imagine there's studies for sure, but in this area, are we any different than some of the state studies, or?
That's a really interesting question, because there are certain things that we can look at. We can look at, okay, what's the perceived risk of harm? Do kids perceive using marijuana as risky, harmful?
Okay. Interesting. Yes.
So, and one of the interesting things about that is that kids perceive marijuana as less risky now than they would have 10 years ago. And a lot of that is because of the legalization trend, right? So that's changing their perceptions. But also, we can ask kids, what's the likelihood that your parents would catch you if you're using? And so they have different perceptions about that. What would your parents disapprove? What's interesting, Lisa, is that here in our community, kids tell us that they do know their parents would disapprove. And by and large, they do see the use of these substances as fairly risky. That may or may not determine whether they use. Some other things we looked at are how easy is it for kids to get these substances? And most of the people that we talk to, whether they're young or adults, say, oh, it's easy. Well, why is it easy? In our case, we think, from what people tell us and from what the kids tell us, it's not so much that not that they can't get it necessarily at a retail establishment, but that's not what's happening most of the time. They're getting it from older friends, older adults. Sometimes it is family, because people have different views on whether how harmful it is, or well, I'd rather that they drink here than be out.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, so all of these things can play in, yeah. And it does kind of depend on the community. So one of the things that we do in prevention, so for example, if you look at it similar to in a treatment setting, if someone's having a problem, they'll come in, person talks to them, they ask as many questions as they can, they do an assessment, they try to find out what's going on in your particular situation and what can we do. Let's develop a plan to help you as an individual. And in a similar way, within prevention, we look at our community and we try to learn as much as we possibly can about what's going on in our particular community that may be different from what's going on even, you know, in Jackson County or in Macon County or whatever. And then based on that information, we try to develop a plan. What are we going to do about this? How are we going to try to reduce the risk to youth in our community?
So your job then is more on the research end of coming up with that data that you've, you know, kind of been talking about, and, you know, the different, you know, or are you actually one then that goes in and talks to students, or do they come to you, or is it a little bit of both?
It's both.
Okay.
We have been, like, for example, my particular grant, the grant that I work under, is specifically for Haywood County. Now, our prevention services within Mountain Projects actually serves the seven far western counties.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yes.
And I failed to mention, Mountain Projects is a community action agency. They've been around since the war on poverty began in the 60s, and we have a Head Start. We have a Head Start program. We have HUD and, you know, weatherization services, all kinds of things. But anyway, so in relation to the grant that I work under here in Haywood County, we are finishing up our, you know, what we call the assessment phase, where we've gathered as much information as we can. We continue to do that, but we do it more heavily, you know, on the front end. And we've been in the planning stages. Okay, so now this is what we know. What else do we need to learn, and where do we go from here? And once we've decided, okay, these are the things that we think we want to try to do in the community, then we'll move into the implementation phase.
Right.
And, you know, in past work that I've done, that has included, you know, doing youth education, going into classrooms. It's included doing adult education, you know, doing presentations to educate parents and teachers and whatnot about these are things, you know, you guys need to know. And it's also included talking to the media to raise awareness. It's included talking to legislators or local lawmakers about what are some things that can be done, you know, that will help protect, shore up the environment.
A lot involved.
There is a lot.
And how long have you been working on then this particular project, if you will? How, you know, from start to finish, and then a multifaceted question on that then. If it's, well, answer that first. Because maybe you'll answer.
So in this particular case, this is a little different than a previous job that I had, but I started the end of November of 2019.
Okay.
So, you know, and sometimes there are things that influence it that you have, for example, COVID.
Yeah, that changes everything.
That kind of changed timelines for a lot of people. It's changed the way people do things. You know, a lot of us
how
are
accessible they are.
Yes, we're accustomed to being able to go into schools and do all kinds of stuff. Well, now everything is virtual, and schools have a lot on their plates. But anyway, so since November of last year, I've been gathering information, talking to people, and trying to lay the groundwork. And that's not something that I do in isolation,
right? Or
that our department does in isolation. Yeah. We try to involve as many folks in the community as we can. People in the faith community, people in healthcare, people from the schools, you know, people from law enforcement. You know, we try to involve as many folks as we can in that process.
Okay. Well, I thought maybe it had been taking longer than this. So that's not that long. From November to here is really not that long at all. I mean, we're coming up on a year, but still, that's not as long. I was wondering if you were going to tell me it had been. You're doing a lot in a year.
Well,
yeah, I wonder if it would be longer, and I was going to ask if things changed over that time. But if you're, from start to finish, basically going to be ready to implement something in about a year, that's not.
Yeah, we're hoping in the next, well, it's one of those things that it's kind of fluid.
Yeah.
That's one of the things about this work is it's fluid, but yeah, we're hoping in the next few months, next 3 to 6 months, we can begin moving. Again, we have to determine what's our strategy going to be, and who do we need to.
So do you have any idea what that strategy is going to be yet? Do you foresee that you will be in the school system, or probably multifaceted, I would think, a little bit?
Yeah, one thing I can say that will definitely continue or will be part of our strategy is a communications campaign. Now, it's interesting, I've been learning a lot about that too. I've always worked a lot with media. I've always tried to, I've always done a newsletter, for example, trying to educate folks in the community, but an all-out communications campaign is, you have to put a lot of thought and planning into that. So this is the message we want to get out to people, or these are several things we want to get across. And, you map it all out, how you're going to do that over time. It's not like it's a one-shot deal. So that's one thing I'm sure, and you mentioned the website. So mountainstrongwnc.org, for example, is part of a communications campaign. That's tied in with our Mountain Strong campaign. And there's lots of good information there. So whether you're a parent or a young person or a teacher or a coach or whatever it might be, I encourage you to go to the website, look around.
It is packed full.
Yeah.
I learned things from there. You've got some very helpful information.
Yeah, there's a lot of good information, and that's something that Patty Tibbery and Mark Pylon with our department kind of got that going. I'm not sure how long the website's been up, but yeah, they've put a lot of work into that. And one thing that's new on the website is a little survey. We're doing a survey right now that is actually kind of fun, kind of cool, asking people, what does being Mountain Strong mean to you?
Okay.
So I invite, anybody who happens to be watching to take a look at that.
Cool. Okay, so you mentioned a little bit about, kind of interviewing people or talking to people, family members and stuff like that. Do you use the ACE test for that? And if you do, explain what that means, what ACE stands for.
Okay. So, well, I'll answer the one question first. I do not use it really per se. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences.
Okay.
That was part of a study that was done within a healthcare system. Gosh, I don't know how many years ago. It's been quite a while back now, but it has become more, I guess, familiar to people, or people hear that term ACEs more now. I'll take this opportunity to say that Patty that's really one of her areas of expertise,
Okay.
and so I'd encourage you might want to do a follow-up interview with her.
Yeah.
But basically, what they wanted to do was they wanted to create a questionnaire. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a test; it's a questionnaire that people could fill out, asking about what we would consider traumatic or adverse childhood experiences. And what they were looking at was, okay, if someone has had, a certain number of these, does that increase their risk for certain diseases later on?
Yes.
Heart disease, diabetes, all kinds of things.
Substance use. Yes.
Yeah. And what they found is, yes, it can. So, for example, let's say there are 10 items on the original questionnaire. So if someone had, 6 or 8 of those, that would put them at a significantly higher risk. Now, that doesn't mean that because of those experiences, they're going to develop those conditions. It's similar to how, when I go to the doctor and I have lab work done, the doctor sits down with me later and says, okay, well, this number's a little high. This is what you can do to kind of keep that in check before it develops into something more serious. And that was kind of the idea behind that ACEs study. The other interesting thing about that I can tell you is, since that original study, you know, a lot of people have pointed out that, well, okay, maybe I haven't experienced any of these 10 things, but I did experience something that I considered traumatic in my childhood, you know? So there's been a recognition that there are limits to that questionnaire. It's just, it's like a lot of other things, it's a tool.
Yes.
It's a tool. And
I could see where it would be a tool, maybe more even in the therapy end of it too. You know, if they're had hit,
well,
you know, 6 of those markers, or, you know, those experiences in their past, that would help the therapist kind of know, you know, how to.
But doctors actually are the ones commonly using it.
No kidding.
Yeah. And in fact, pediatricians, some pediatricians will use it because they want, the idea is that if they're seeing that a kid is experiencing a lot of difficulties or, you know, difficult circumstances, they want to try to intervene.
Okay.
Prevention.
Early on.
Right?
Prevention.
They want to intervene earlier, sooner rather than later, so that they would then compensate for, you know, any heightened risk that kid may have for certain things later on.
I don't think I realized that it was used for other health conditions. Other than, I've only heard about it as it relates to substance use, abuse. So I didn't realize that they even looked at it for other diseases. Well, so that's very interesting. And that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's one reason too. Now you see more. At least there's an attempt to integrate physical health care and mental health care.
Yes.
You know, I can't think of a term, but
whole health.
But they're trying to move us toward healthcare systems that, instead of separating everything out, you know, a person can go in and be treated as a whole person.
Yes.
Because they are all
absolutely,
you know, intertwined.
Intertwined with each other. Yeah, I totally believe that. Yeah. Have you found that the need for some of the interventions, if you will, the need to talk to the kids, if you will, has gotten, you've had to target younger than, say, 10 years ago, you know, where when I was growing up, you know, you wouldn't think you would have to talk to anybody but maybe 17, 18 years old, and now you're mentioning 13 years old. So is that, or is that just my impression?
No, I think
study to that.
Yeah, I can't point you to a particular study, but I believe there is. I think there have been studies around this. Well, just survey data, you know, over the years, and then also in talking to other people who've been doing this kind of work for some time. You know, somebody that I really respect. I remember him saying, you know, kids are now doing in high school what they used to do in college. They're doing in middle school what they used to do in high school, and they're doing in elementary school what they used to do in middle school. So yes, I mean, I think that kids, and some of that is, again, the environment that we live in. Kids are exposed to things so much younger. So in that sense, yes, and what we tell parents, teachers, you know, to begin having conversations early and often, that yes, you know, and of course everything has to be developmentally appropriate. Kids in 3rd or 4th grade are not going to be able to absorb the same kind of information that a kid in high school is. But I also believe, Lisa, very strongly, you know, some people will say, well, you know, by the time they get to high school, it's too late. I don't believe that. I believe you have to continue having those conversations. You know, I have an 18-year-old and a 22-year-old. I'll be darned if I'm going to stop, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm going to be in their ears saying, you know, and they can roll their eyes at me. They can, you know, whatever. But it's like,
well, you're building on a foundation at that point. You know, you would hope that at the younger years, that 3rd and 4th grade, that you've started a foundation, and then you're making that foundation a little stronger, and then you're, you know, you're starting to add to that, at, like you said, age appropriate and stuff like that. But you don't stop building the house or the, you know, the relationship because they reach a certain age. Yeah,
they still need to hear it. And there's actually, I just found something not too long ago. There's a really great website. I can't think of the name, but that talks about having a conversation with your young person as they're going off to college, for example.
Right.
You know, because again, totally
Yep.
different environment. You know, new developmental challenges,
Yes.
and so yeah, good to have that conversation. Yes, we have to start it earlier than most people would think, but that doesn't mean it ends there. Yeah.
So how do you, how will you measure your success, and what keeps you motivated, especially as you see, you know, in your research and stuff that, you know, the overdose deaths are increasing, or kids are using at younger ages, or it's more prevalent as you're, you know, in some of your research. What keeps you motivated, and, you know, how do you measure your success then?
Well, first of all, that, you know, measuring success is really tricky, especially in prevention. How do you prove that something didn't happen because of what you did?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sometimes the reality is, as parents, as human beings, as professionals, we can do all the right things and things still happen. So that's tough. How do you measure success? For me personally, well, let me back up and I'll say that, you know, as a program, we try to build in, you know, how are we going to evaluate that? How are we going to evaluate whether we've changed something within the community, whether it's through survey results or, you know, whatever it might be. So we do try to measure to some degree, as much as we can, that we've succeeded. Personally, I have often measured success in much smaller ways. So for example, if I've been in a classroom full of, you know, 15, 16-year-old kids, and sometimes, you know, sometimes they're very interactive and you think, oh, that went great, and then other times it's like, I don't know if I'm but it would always, my sense of success would come from when somebody would tell me later, you know, they were talking about that.
Okay.
Or my kid came to the dinner table and said, I'd never really thought about it that way, you know, those kinds of things. So
Yes. Sometimes
sometimes those are the ways that you measure success. As far as what motivates me, again, I hate to see people suffer. You know, whether it's someone who's suffering because of their own condition, or the loved ones around them who suffer, you know, and that is true, Lisa, across the board for any type of substance misuse or substance use disorder. So for example, we don't always think about, there are the more quiet ones, like my uncle died because of his tobacco dependency, probably 20, 30 years earlier than he should have. Passed away quietly in an ICU room after 2 months of being unconscious more than he was conscious, being barely recognizable towards the end, you know, and those of us who were left behind really felt robbed. You don't hear about those losses. I've also seen people who suffered debilitating diseases as the result of whether it was tobacco use or something else. Those don't always get noticed. But yeah, it's because of that. It's like when you experience a loss because of someone's substance use or misuse, you don't want other people to go through that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And that's largely what I think keeps me going.
Which is why I do what I do.
And I know it is.
Yeah.
I know it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the whole idea, to help somebody not suffer what I have been.
Right. Right.
So anything else for you as far as that, anything that we missed that you want to make sure we talk about, or?
You know, I just want to say I appreciate so much what you're doing in the community, and you know, it's just great, all the attention that you're bringing to these issues. And I think that's the thing, we have to get past the point of thinking, well, that's somebody else's problem.
Yes.
or that would never happen with my kid, or that would never happen in my home. Substance use disorders, or the results of those substance misuse can happen to anybody.
Yes, they can.
And it's ugly when it does happen. But there are things that we can do. There are things that we can do to at least reduce the risk.
Yeah.
And in the same way that I want to take care of my, I don't want to develop diabetes.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't want to
Yeah.
develop heart disease.
Yeah.
I try to do things to take care of myself, and there are things we can do. So I just want to encourage people, learn what you can, use the resources, and when you encounter someone like Lisa who's doing good work, thank them for what they're doing.
Thank you for what you're doing.
Oh, I appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so the one last question that I've been asking everybody, if there was one thing that you could change, or in your case, one message that you would like to get across as it relates to stigma or getting the word out, or something along those lines. One thing that you would change, or one last message to get across. What would that be?
Again, don't assume that your kid knows the facts versus what they think they know. Don't assume that your kid would not be in a position where they might do something that they know you would disapprove of. Don't assume that they know what to do if they get in that situation. And really, again, just communicate, not only with your own kids or the kids who are in your life, but with other parents. That's one thing that we know can really make a difference. When parents communicate with each other, and they're like, hey, Johnny told me he's coming over this evening. I just want to make sure, and these are...
Yeah, don't be afraid to do that.
Yeah.
Don't be a...
Because parents can help each other. They really can.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Libby.
Well, thanks for
appreciate
listening
the
to
time,
me.
and we got to sit out and enjoy the afternoon. So,
Yeah.
yes. So
Beautiful.
Thank you.